All right. Well, thank you for joining us here today. Nicole and I are here talking with David Kraft from the Albany Law School. He is our staff attorney and was the former Community Development Clinic Fellow. And we're here talking today because we had a really great conversation last week with Rose Miller from Pinnacle HR. And we wanted to talk about some of the legal issues, legal things that you might want to be thinking through when it comes to the coronavirus and how it's affecting your business. Last week, we talked about the 3 different scenarios, whether that is a business who is struggling to kind of make ends meet at this point, is looking at some of maybe at their lease, looking at their employees, ways that they can try to reduce the amount of money that they're putting out while they're not taking as much in. We also are going to look at scenario 2, which is a business who has most of their workers at home. So they're maybe working remotely at this point, but they're still able to have business coming in, and they don't necessarily have to let their staff go at this point. And then scenario 3, we have our individuals who are essential. They're a business who is maybe has more business now because of the coronavirus. So these are the same scenarios we talked about last week, but really looking at them from a legal aspect. So David, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're here today?
Sure. Thank you, Katie and Nicole, for having me. Yes, as you mentioned, my name is David Kraft. I am a staff attorney at Albany Law School's Community Economic Development Clinic. And so what our clinic does, we're an in-house clinic at the law school that provides, first, the law students an opportunity to get experiential learning in representing real-life clients in different areas of law. So our clinic is part of 3 other in-house clinics at our law school. Our mission is to be a legal but second important is that our mission is to be a legal resource to the community in assisting individuals and groups who are trying to engage in community economic development initiatives in their neighborhood by providing pro bono transactional legal resources. So a lot of our work involves working with small businesses, nonprofits, micro entrepreneurs, from communities that lack the resources and providing them with access to information on different legal aspects when they are either starting, operating, or even ending their business or nonprofit. We do direct legal representation, where we also offer people, individuals and groups, actual legal services on a particular matter, whether that's starting up your business, negotiating contracts, dealing with commercial leases, buying property. And we also do these workshops where we provide resources to other stakeholders in the community, like business improvement districts and others, in informing entrepreneurs, small businesses, and nonprofits about different topics that they should be aware of, when engaging in a business, such as hiring, intellectual property issues, commercial lease issues, and so forth.
Great. Well, thank you for being here. I know this is a very odd time that we're living through right now, and it's a bit confusing and scary for a lot of people. So I think it's important that people like you that have knowledge are willing to be here and have these conversations. And if anybody, as you said, if anybody has questions about what we're talking about today, or about their business and how that you can help them through that, any of those things you've already talked about, please, we'll put some information out for your contact so that people can reach out to you. So let's jump right into this scenario 1, which I think is one of those kind of more scary spots to be in, right? Where you maybe have less income coming in. Maybe your business has been subjected to close during this time. You maybe have an online presence, or maybe you're just a restaurant who has maybe takeout at this point, but it's maybe not the same amount of income that you need to sustain your business in the way that you did before. Can you talk about some of those scenarios that people might be looking at in this position, and legally kind of where they're at with maybe unemployment? Maybe they're looking at potentially letting staff go, maybe furloughing staff. Can you talk a little bit about where people might be with the staff issues?
Sure. Yeah. So as you stated, for a business that is, currently has dealt with significant loss in income, as a result of, some of the government mandated orders for businesses to either non-essential businesses to shut down or for people to stay at home or work from home. Yes, unemployment insurance, obviously, unemployment is going to be a big thing for small business owners to be aware of at this time, right? So if you have to lay off employees, whether that is for a temporary basis or for a permanent basis, those employees are allowed the right to apply for unemployment insurance from their local or from the State Department of Labor. And they're allowed to receive a sum of income on a weekly basis until they're either able to find new work or be able to return to work from that employer. So, so some of the things that, business owners need to keep in mind is that, even though, is one, to make sure that they have been in compliance with unemployment insurance benefits, meaning that they have been, that they've, one, properly classified individuals who've worked for them as employees. If they are individuals that they control their work, they direct the control over the manner and way that the individual performs the work for the business. That you actually did provide unemployment insurance benefit. That you did pay into unemployment insurance. Because what could happen is if you do lay off an individual, and let's say maybe you weren't providing the payroll services for that individual in terms of making sure you're paying into unemployment insurance for that individual, and they go to apply, they'll still be able to get it, obtain it. The state will provide them with the benefits, but afterwards the state will then fine the employer for failure to maintain the proper for failure to pay into the unemployment insurance system as they were required. And those fines can be excessive. They can be thousands of dollars for every day that you did not properly pay into the uninsurance employment tax. So that's something that obviously, for all employers, they should be thinking about, especially sometimes employers fail to understand the importance of the misclassification. They sometimes fall into a scenario where they think if they call someone an independent contractor, that automatically relieves them of any opportunity of the requirements to comply with the unemployment insurance requirements under state and federal law. But that is not the case. It's not about what you provide as a title to an individual. But again, as I stated before, the criteria that the government looks at when they determine whether an individual is deemed an employee or an independent contractor of a business is how much control that employer or business owner exercises over the individual. Do they direct how many hours that individual works? Do they, is the individual paid based off of what the business owner provides, or is it based off of what the individual has provided as their own rate? Or the equipment and manner in which the individual works, who directs that? Is that the employee or is that the individual? So these are types of things that can make a determination. And so employers, so that could be one scary issue that employers might be dealing with at this time. The other thing to keep in mind, is the whole aspect of, if you do furlough an employee, are you giving them an understanding of how long they might be furloughed for, when they should expect to come back to work? Because if they're applying for unemployment insurance, one of the mandates that's going to be required is that while they're on unemployment, that they're trying to actively find other work. There might have been a little bit of an exception that's been implemented as a result of COVID-19. The response to that, I think there's been some flexibility that the public officials have provided, so that way individuals might not have to be looking for work as actively as previously required. But that's important to consider, because if an individual is acting on the premises that they will eventually be rehired at this new job, then, or not their new job, at the existing job where they've been furloughed, well, then that's important, because that individual's actions are going to be different from someone who might have been permanently laid off in terms of the other employment opportunities that they look for. Mm-hmm. So those are some of the things that an employer might be thinking about at this time, if they're in the process of laying off workers or placing individuals on temporary leave of absence, or temporary leave of absence, or furloughing them for a temporary period of time.
Mm-hmm. So definitely understanding how you hired them, right? What their classification is, because they are eligible, and you want to make sure that you're in the right when they're going into that position of applying for unemployment. And the difference between furloughing somebody versus laying somebody off, and the expectation of whether you're going to be bringing them back, and if your business is there to bring them back too, being really open and honest with your staff about what that looks like.
Right, exactly.
Before we talked a little bit about leases, commercial leases, the difference, what stipulations are coming from the government, saying that some of these items have been pushed off for a little while, but how does that apply to commercial leases? Can you speak a little bit on that?
Sure. Under the state orders, there have been moratoriums that have been placed on many court proceedings, including bringing summary proceedings to evict a tenant for failure to pay rent. So what that means is that if an individual, if a small business is unable to make rent due to this current issue, due to the current pandemic, their landlord is not able to immediately bring a court proceeding to have them evicted from the premises. However, that does not absolve the individuals or the business owner's obligation to pay rent to their landlord. Your obligations under your commercial lease are still essentially enforceable. It's just that there's no recourse at this time for landlords to enforce those provisions for the time being. So, it's for tenants, for business tenants, it's something to keep in mind that even if you think like, okay, I have a period of time where I don't have to pay rent because I know my landlord cannot evict me at this time, you still have to be mindful of what other provisions are in your lease, in terms of what other provisions are in your lease if you fail to apply, if you fail to follow through with your lease payments. So sometimes landlords will include late fees into the lease, that if you're late on your rent, they can charge you an extra fee. It could be an additional percentage of your rent. It could be based on every day that you're late under your lease. They can add additional fees. So that's something else to consider. So with that being said, as a tenant, you don't want to just think, okay, because the state has issued a moratorium, I don't have to pay rent, I'm fine, and I can just take that money, whatever money I have, and apply it to something else, which I understand that could be, as a business tenant, if you have employees, if you want to keep paying your employees, or if you have other creditors that you want to pay. I understand the need or the urgency to want to do that. But you really want to reach out to your landlord and utilize this opportunity as a way to negotiate for changes in your lease provisions. Maybe you can ask for a reduction in your rent from your landlord, and then see if the landlord can then tack on those can add on a increase in payments for future terms. You can reach out to your landlord and see if they would be willing to apply your security deposit to the months in rent. So maybe you pay half of your rent, and then your landlord can utilize your security deposit to cover the other half of your rent, or whatever it might be. So this is an opportunity here, because commercial leases are contracts and they can be negotiated. You have an opportunity here to really reach out to your landlord and speak with them and see what types of concessions you can negotiate for. And landlords want that, because landlords are in a predicament. They can't evict you. It's unlikely that they're going to be able to find another business to move into a space, so they want to keep you there. And so this is an opportunity for both parties to come to the table and come to an amicable resolution that helps the business owner be able to stay in business, and the landlord to be able to continue to collect rent or some rent that they can utilize to cover the cost of owning and maintaining the space.
Mm-hmm. So it's important to really talk to your landlord now before you kind of come up to a situation. I know April is hitting pretty quickly, April 1st. So really understanding what's needed on both sides, right? Understanding your contract, your lease, and that also plays into contracts that you might have with other vendors and things like that. Just understanding what's required of you, if there's any stipulations in there that you need to pay attention to. Anything that people should keep in mind when they're looking at some of their vendor contracts, anything that they should look into specifically in those contracts?
Yeah, I mean, you want to look in your contracts to see if there's any provisions that that speak to when there is an unforeseen circumstance that potentially that causes you as the business to be able to not be able to perform. Does that give you an ability to either terminate the contract or maybe seek a concession in payment? That could be a matter to look for in your contract. Again, these are contracts. Again, as I said before, this is an opportunity to go back to those vendors and renegotiate some of the terms that might be in the contract. Because if a vendor's already performed their obligations under the contract and you're still, you're required to submit payment, an emergency doesn't eliminate your responsibility under the contract. So I mean, unless it's in there. So you definitely want to look in there to see if there's any provisions that speak to that. If not, then you want to see what is the potential recourse for a vendor if you're not able to make payment on time, or if you're not able to make payment at all, right? Because is there any late fees that can be tacked on? If not, maybe you might have some wiggle room here to give yourself some time to allocate the funds to make the payments. I mean, obviously, you don't want to end up in a situation where you end up with judgments as a small business against you later on. You don't want to end up in a situation where you end up with mechanics liens if there's maybe any contractor work that's being performed on a business space like that you're fixing up to utilize it for your business. You don't want to end up with mechanics liens against you. Neither does your landlord. So these are the types of things to think about. As a small business owner, if you're losing income and you do have contractors that you've or vendors that you have responsibilities upcoming for the next few months.
Okay, so if somebody has those contracts, can they potentially go to you if they're confused about maybe some of the wording that they need to be looking for or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Our clinic is happy to help people with reviewing any existing contracts that they have in place or commercial leases that they have in place to look for provisions that might be able to provide them with any relief during this period of time. So, again, if it's for commercial leases, we can look for rent abatement provisions that might allow for your rent to be reduced due to circumstances that are outside of the tenant's control. Granted, so we definitely provide those types of services. We can help people through even maybe looking for ways to renegotiate the terms of their contracts, and so then that way when they can go back to their landlords or the vendors and seek out a resolution that can work for parties.
And to confirm, just so people are aware, if they come to you, I know a lot of people are nervous about the amount of money that they're putting out right now. Are those services free for them, or is there any payment that they would need to do for that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, our services our clinic offers is pro bono to individuals, small businesses, nonprofits. So yeah, absolutely. Just for a consultation, we would provide those services for free. Absolutely.
So if people have questions, we definitely will have a link to contact you. So if they need to reach out, they can. Going into a couple of things that have been coming up recently, paid sick leave and family medical leave. Can you speak about those and kind of what a business owner is responsible for when it comes to both of those items, or anything else that might, hit a business owner at some point in this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, under the, due to this pandemic, there's big issues about paid sick leave and family medical leave, or family hour medical leave, for small businesses. So, under the state of New York, businesses are required to provide family or medical leave, and these will rise in this circumstance, particularly if an individual has to care for a family member because they are sick and they have maybe been diagnosed with the COVID-19 virus, or even if it's due to the simple fact that school closures have occurred, and so now an individual has to stay home to take care of a child that is under 18 years old. Family medical leave is applicable to those individuals, and they're allowed to receive benefits for them. And so a small business owner needs to be aware that essentially, though, that is a benefit that the employer would have to essentially have paid for or acquired a sort of insurance to cover the individual's a portion of the individual's salary or wages up to a certain amount of money, in order so that way that individual can receive access to those benefits. For paid sick leave, sorry, forgive me, I don't recall all of the details off the top of my head, but I think, yes. So for paid sick leave in New York, my understanding is with the COVID-19 response from the state, they require both, you can provide, an employer to provide both unpaid and paid sick leave, and they have set certain requirements based on the size of your business. So I don't have all the details in front of me. The Department of Labor is definitely a very useful resource for business owners to look into. But my understanding is that for, like, let's say a small business, not small business, let's say for a business that has 1 to 10 employees and less than $1 million in revenue, and this will be taken they'll take this in consideration as of January 1st, 2020. You're required to provide unpaid sick leave for an individual who is choosing to either self-quarantine or they're feeling symptoms of the COVID-19 based off of the guidelines that have been provided. You also have to pay. You also have to provide them with the opportunity to return back to work after their self-quarantine is over, or anything of that nature. And there's a certain requirements where you would have to provide them with paid sick leave in that circumstance as well. And forgive me, I don't know the conditions of that. Or the same in regards to employers that have 1 to 10 employees and have more than $1 million in revenue, you're required to provide up to 5 days of paid sick leave for an individual that but as a result of an individual who is maybe, like I said, again, meeting the same conditions as before in regards to self-quarantine or facing adverse health effects as a result of the virus. So and these are things that small business owners need to be aware of at this time, and they should definitely look into the Department of Labor's website for guidelines about these matters, as well as the Workers' Compensation Board, because the Department of Workers' Compensation is the state agency that oversees family medical leave issues. And so, as I said, family medical leave is applicable to all private employers in the state of New York, regardless of your employment size. Now, granted, family medical leave benefits, there is a certain threshold that employees have to meet before they can qualify. So you have to work a certain amount of hours or days before you're eligible for family medical leave. But if you have employees, you want to make sure you're aware of what the criteria is for your employees, and you also want to make sure you're providing notice, because that's the most important thing as well. is that you're providing notice to all of your employees about whether or not they are eligible for these benefits.
Okay, great. So for somebody who is the business owner then, who maybe not, eligible for unemployment at this point, obviously, or for some of these other items, what's the scenario for them? Would that be then looking into loans, assistance programs, things like that?
Yeah, yes, yes. So for self-employed and the business owners themselves, so here's an interesting fact, because I mean, you can technically be the owner of the business and the employee, right? So let's say, you can have the business, you can be an owner, where that means you are giving yourself the right to share in the profits and losses of the business, but you could have also designated yourself as an employee of the business, and have been paying into payroll, right? So if you had designated yourself as an employee of the business, then you still have access to those unemployment insurance benefits just like the rest of your employees. So that's one thing to keep in mind. If you did not designate yourself as an employee of the business, and put yourself on payroll like the rest of your employees, well, in that circumstance, as you said, Katie, you might want to look into other resources that are out there, like the SBA disaster loan program that's been created for business owners to utilize if they need access to funds to help pay for inventory, for creditor matters, or staff if they are trying to keep their staff in place. So those are definitely loan programs to look into. Yeah, there's also some grants that I understand are being created right now. I think Facebook says they're creating a grant program to provide relief to 30,000 small businesses. So those are definitely resources to look for, and you can try to obtain access to them.
Okay. And the SBA does provide assistance through the SBDC. There's a local chapter for that too. And so if people do have questions about the SBA loans, they can go to the SBDC and ask for assistance in that. There's also, and you had mentioned this to me before we started the video, there is an ESD training coming up. And there are other programs through chambers and different resources that will provide SBDC and SBA will both provide information as to how to apply for those loans. And I have been hearing lately, right, they waived the unemployment requirements around, I think, what is it, 10 days, where there's normally.
Right. Yeah, right. So traditionally, employee would have to wait at least a week before they can apply for unemployment insurance benefits. Right, in the state and federal, they've waived that requirement, so individual can go in right away to apply for those types of benefits.
So it's important to look into these right away then. What was that, Nicole?
I had a question about the unemployment, because I've been just witnessing a lot of people having a hard time getting in touch with the unemployment, because obviously there's millions of people applying at this time. And I think I read somewhere that technically unemployment benefits don't start till you actually apply and like get through. Is that true, or is there a way to prove like you went on this day to try to get unemployment benefits, but you couldn't actually get through for like 3 days, until like 3 days later?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure. I don't have the answer to that. Hoping the Department of Labor would, or the State Department of Labor would provide some rules or regulations about, like you said, if with the long waiting periods, or is it retroactive from the date you initially reach out, contact the agency and apply, or is it from the time that it's approved? So that's a good question.
Okay.
Let's see. So you had also mentioned me before lost business insurance. Is that a thing that people would have had to apply for before? I know there's a lot of questioning around insurance right now and what applies and what doesn't apply to pandemic. And do you have any information on that for me?
Yeah, again, I think with a small business, if you had insurance coverage prior to this pandemic, and there is something like lost business insurance coverage in your policies, that's something that you might want to revisit and look into and see if you can access those as a result of what's occurred. I don't know if those insurance coverage would allow for something such as this. I don't know. Again, that's going to be dependent upon your policy. But for example, if you had to shut down your brick and mortar space as a result and you had some lost business income, there could be a potential opportunity there in your insurance policy that might cover your business for your brick and mortar, for example, being having to physically close for a period of time and you losing business income. So again, these are things that you'll want to look in your insurance policy and see what specific coverages are included in your policy.
Okay.
But definitely that's something to look for first in terms of lost business income policies if you have anything of that nature in your insurance policy.
So really look through your contracts, look through your policies, make sure that there's something in place. If there is, go for it, use it. And if there's not, then try to have conversations with those individuals as soon as possible, or those companies as soon as possible, to make sure that you can kind of get yourself through these situations.
Right, exactly.
All right. Is there anything else for this scenario one of the business owner who's in a tough spot right now?
Yeah, no, not that I can think of. I think we touched on it there.
So scenario two is looking at that business that has gone online. Their staff is maybe working from home at this point, but they don't necessarily have to lay people off at this point. Is there anything under that scenario that you would like to cover, whether that's kind of legalities around business or employees being, working from home or anything like that?
Yeah, I think the main thing is to what is your telecommuting policy or remote work policy, if you had any. If you didn't have one, putting something together that provides information to your employees about, whether or not, what hours they're required to work during the day. How do they report their work? The hours that they worked, I apologize, to the employer, right? These are the types of things that matter because the wage and hour laws still apply, regardless of if an individual is working from home or they're working in an office. So, if you're dealing with non-exempt employees or your employees who are paid on an hourly basis, employer is only required to pay an employee for the actual hours that they do work. So this is going to be important for individuals who are working from home. How do you keep track of when those individuals are actually working? Do you have something in place to where they can actually, keep track of their hours? Let's say if they used a punch clock system for brick and mortar space, are you creating an alternative mechanism for them to report their hours? For exempt employees, you have to keep in mind that those individuals employers are obligated to pay exempt employees their full wages or salary for a week, regardless of how many hours, as long as an exempt employee works that week, whether they work part day or full day, they're required to pay them their full wage and salary for that week. So that's something to keep in mind, again, as to understanding that if an individual has only work maybe like a few hours in a day or something of that nature, they're still entitled to their full pay. So those are some things to consider. Other things to consider for small business owners is understanding that you'll likely, if you require your employees to maybe incur certain expenses for to set up a telecommuting workspace, if they have to pay for a Zoom account, let's say, or if they have to, buy a webcam because maybe they don't have a webcam capability at home, those expenses are required to be reimbursed to an employee, right? Especially if it's going to put them in a point where they're below the minimum wage as a result of incurring those expenses. An employer needs to make sure that they're reimbursing their employees for those expenses that they take on in order to work from home. definitely things. Other things to keep in mind, depending on the industry you're in, if you're dealing with private information of, let's say, clients, what is the, what is your, do you have a policy put in place or some mechanism put in place to ensure that individuals, when they're working on clients' files on their personal laptops, that you're informing them not to store those files on their hard drives or things of that nature, to, maybe store them in a password protected storage, mechanism, like, if you have an Office 365 OneDrive account that you keep for your records for your clients, that you utilize something like that, or some sort of other remote access storage drive, because if individuals are keeping private client information on a personal computer or laptop, and someone else gets wind of it, or they end up compromised due to some sort of spam or virus threat on their laptop, then that puts you in a predicament where you have to notify all your clients of potential breaches in data and stuff like that, right? So you want to make sure you have some sort of instructions that you can give to your employees so that they can follow, in terms of when they're working on private client information at home, how to properly store and keep the information from being potentially breached from outside parties.
Mm-hmm.
So that's definitely those are some of the things that off the top come to my mind about when having your employees work from home. So yeah, those are definitely some things to keep in mind.
Great. And for the business who's maybe an essential business right now, they have more business coming in now than they had before. Maybe they need to hire at this point. What are some of those things that they might want to keep in mind, especially when potentially hiring part-time workers or people who are seasonal, in a way seasonal? Anything that they should keep in mind when they're looking to hire, or just in their business as they continue to maybe take on more business, whether that's an employee who maybe has too many hours to work in a day, those kinds of things.
Yeah, those are good questions. So right, I mean, if you're taking on part-time or seasonal employees, just keeping aware the cost of taking on employees for your business, that you're still required to mandate provide the mandated benefits for employees, like I said, like paid sick leave, family medical leave, short-term disability benefits and workers' compensation, especially during this time. If you keep in mind that if you're having employees that are having to interact with the public, and there's potential likelihood that they can be exposed to the virus as a result of working on the job, that is a workers' compensation issue. So you would need to make sure you have the appropriate insurance to cover those employees if those risks arise and they have to go to the hospital, quarantine themselves as a result of that. So that's some of the main things that comes to mind. Other things that come to mind is, if you have to hire and you have your vetting process, how is that going to work in this period of time, right? If you're doing background checks for individuals, how are you going to ensure you verify their prior employment? Utilizing, getting in people's prior employers' contact information, and how you're going to be able to contact them to conduct your background checks for employees. Do you have documents that need to be, signed in person, or can you utilize e-signatures and online portals as a way to for individuals to upload any hiring documentation that's needed? So yeah, those are some things that come to mind when thinking about hiring. Do you need to do certain positions need to be fulfilled by employees, or can you utilize independent contractors for them? And by doing that, then you alleviate the cost of having to take on employees. So maybe if it's some contracting work, can you outsource some of that work to another company who can maybe take on some of the responsibilities. And so then therefore you're not worrying about all of the employment requirements. You can just, focus on paying whatever the fee, or not the fee, the wage or the rate for independent contractor.
For somebody who's confused about the difference between an independent contractor and somebody who's brought on as staff, can you explain what the difference is between those two things?
Yes, sure. So as I mentioned before, the independent contractor versus employee distinction is really based on the exercise of control over how the work is done and who really exercises that control, right? So, generally in an employer-employee relationship, the employer is really the one that exercises direct control over all manners of how the work is completed. So they're going to be the ones that set out the amount of time or the hours that need to be complete, that need to be fulfilled. They're going to give you the equipment and supplies in order to do the work. They're going to tell you how the work should be done, specifically according to their criteria. They're also going to set the rates for how much they're going to pay you for in the work. Whereas with an independent contractor, it's really the independent contractor that's directing the control in terms of the manner of how the work is being completed. So they're going to be the independent contractor is going to provide their own supplies and own equipment to do the work. They're going to set their own rates for how much it's going to cost to get the work completed. They're going to do it on their own time, and set their own time for when the work gets completed. And they're going to have their own criteria or manner of how they complete the work. So that's really what it comes down to when you're talking about the difference between staff and an independent contractor, right? So let's say, for example, I know you brought up an example of maybe a company that's being like a company that makes beds and is now seeing an uptick in purchase orders for the beds that they build. So in this situation, the difference between a staff and independent contractor would be, for that bed company hiring people to come in, they give them a set amount of hours to work every day. They give them all of the equipment to build the bed frame, and they provide them with the specific rate of pay of like how much you're going to pay them every hour to work on building these bed frames. Whereas with an independent contractor, what that company would do is they would say, okay, because we can't take on these many orders at this time, or we don't have the capacity to build all the bed frames at this time, we're going to outsource building the bed frames to another company. So we're going to ask another company to please build the bed frames according to these specifications. They're going to hire their own workers. They're going to, or it could be an individual, whatever. They're going to do it on their own time. They're going to utilize their own equipment for building the bed frames, and then they're just going to deliver it to the company, and that company is going to pay them whatever fee the bed frame contractor established. And so that's kind of how you see it. It's like you're really delegating the work and how the work is going to be done to another individual to figure out on their own when you're dealing with an independent contractor.
Right. So what are some other scenarios, or for this scenario, what are some other issues that might pop up, maybe outside of hiring or anything else you can think of that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we touched upon a lot of them. I mean, we touched upon, I think the one that I see coming up is the commercial leasing issue, and I know we touched upon that. I think that's kind of one of the main concerns right now, because businesses are either having to close their offices completely, and they're still under a current lease, and so then they're figuring out how do we, get around, how do we deal with this at this time. Yeah, I mean, we discussed labor and employment. Yeah, I'm trying to think of what else can be of a concern right now.
Well, if people have additional questions, they can definitely reach out to you. We'll include that information. And we do have a live Q&A coming up with you and Rose Miller from Pinnacle HR at the end of this month. So if anybody has any additional questions, please feel free to reach out. And if you think of anything else, please let us know, and we can share that out through LinkedIn.
Yes, we'll do. Thank you.
Well, thank you, David, for being here today. We appreciate all of your knowledge throughout this really difficult time that we're living through. And if anybody has any other questions for you, I'm sure that you'll be there to answer those. So thank you for being there for them. If you, as individuals who are watching right now, have any questions, please send them our way or send them directly to David. And we'll be here with some more information coming at you this month about HR and kind of legal practices that might be involved in HR practice. But anything else we need to add in here, Nicole?
No, I think that's it. Thank you,
Awesome.
David.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Have a great rest of your day, and good luck to everyone out there. You're in our minds. Please reach out if you have anything that comes up or if you need help with anything, and we'll be in touch with you as soon as we can.
Bye.